The cold Pacific water hit my face like 1,000 needles as I plunged into the dark ocean. Above me, I could hear my daughter-in-law Jessica laughing, her voice carried away by the wind. My son Michael stood at the yacht's railing. That same cold smile I'd seen too many times lately stretched across his face. "Say hi to the sharks, Margaret," Jessica had whispered just moments before she shoved me over the edge. The last thing I saw was Michael's hand reaching out not to help me, but to steady Jessica as she pushed. 68 years old, treading water in the middle of nowhere. Watching my own family sail away with my $3 billion fortune. They thought they'd finally gotten rid of the old woman who stood between them and everything they wanted. They were wrong. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how we got to that moment when my own flesh and blood decided I was worth more to them dead than alive. It was 6 months earlier when I first noticed the changes in Michael. I'd built Morrison Industries from nothing after my husband died 20 years ago. Started with a small textile company and turned it into an empire spanning real estate, technology, and manufacturing. Every decision, every late night, every sacrifice was for my family. For Michael. I lived in a sprawling estate in Malibu, the kind of place you see in magazines. 12 bedrooms, an infinity pool overlooking the ocean, and enough staff to run a small hotel. But for all its grandeur, it had become a lonely place since Michael married Jessica 3 years ago. Jessica Chen had seemed perfect when Michael first brought her home. Beautiful, charming, with an MBA from Wharton and a smile that could light up a room. She worked in finance, understood business, and seemed genuinely interested in our family's legacy. I welcomed her with open arms, grateful that my son had found someone who could match his intelligence and ambition. The first red flag came during a family dinner last spring. We were discussing the expansion of our Seattle division when Jessica suggested we liquidate some of our older properties. "Margaret, with all due respect," she said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision, "some of these buildings are just dead weight. We could free up hundreds of millions in capital." I set down my wine glass and looked at her carefully. Those buildings weren't just investments. They were the foundation of everything I'd built, each one purchased during the company's most vulnerable years, when banks wouldn't even return my calls. "Those properties have sentimental value, Jessica. They represent where we came from." She exchanged a look with Michael that I pretended not to notice. "But Mom," Michael said, using that patient tone he'd developed recently, like he was talking to a child, "sentiment doesn't generate returns. We need to think about efficiency." At night, I lay awake thinking about that look between them. It was the kind of silent communication that happens between conspirators, not spouses, discussing business with family. Over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention to things I'd previously overlooked. Jessica would take phone calls in private, walking to the other end of the house when certain people called. Michael began asking more detailed questions about my estate planning, about the trust structures, about who had access to what accounts. The second red flag came when I discovered they'd been meeting with lawyers without telling me. I found out by accident when my own attorney, David Richardson, mentioned seeing Michael at a competing firm downtown. "Just thought it was odd," David said during our monthly review meeting. "The Hartley Group specializes in estate disputes and family wealth transfers. Not the kind of place you'd go for normal business matters." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept my voice steady. Maybe it's something for Jessica's family. But I knew it wasn't. That evening, I decided to test them. "I've been thinking about updating my will," I announced over dinner, watching their faces carefully. "Maybe it's time to simplify things and make sure everything transfers smoothly when the time comes." Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Michael leaned forward slightly. That's probably smart, Mom. Estate planning can be complicated. Maybe we should all sit down with your lawyers together. Make sure everyone understands the structure. The eagerness in his voice broke my heart. This was my son, the little boy I'd raised alone after his father died. The young man I'd mentored through business school, the heir I'd groomed to take over everything I'd built. And he was plotting against me. I started being more careful after that. I installed new security cameras in areas of the house they frequented, upgraded the monitoring on my personal accounts, and began keeping detailed records of our conversations. I hoped I was being paranoid, that I was misreading innocent questions and normal family dynamics. I was wrong. 3 months later, I found the first real evidence. Jessica had left her laptop open in the guest room she used as a home office. I wasn't snooping intentionally. I was just looking for a phone charger, but the screen was displaying an email that made my blood freeze. It was correspondence with a private investigator named Rex Morrison, no relation, despite the shared name. The email thread discussed surveillance on my daily routines, my health appointments, and my travel patterns. But what made me sit down hard in the nearest chair was the final line of Jessica's most recent message. Timeline moved up. Need comprehensive report on medical vulnerabilities and accident scenarios, ASAP. Accident scenarios. My own daughter-in-law was researching ways to make my death look accidental. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take several shots to get clear images. Then I closed the laptop and walked back to my room on unsteady legs, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. That night, I called my oldest friend and former business partner, Patricia Williams. Patricia and I had weathered every storm together over the past 30 years. If anyone would know what to do, it was her. Pat, I need to see you tonight, and I need you to not ask questions until we're face to face. She arrived 2 hours later with a bottle of wine and the same concerned expression she'd worn when I'd called her after Richard's funeral. We sat in my private study, the one room in the house where I was certain there were no listening devices, and I told her everything. Patricia listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in her glass. Margaret, you know what this means, don't you? I nodded, unable to speak around the knot in my throat. They're not just planning to wait for you to die naturally, they're planning to speed up the process. The words hung between us like a death sentence. My son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, wanted me dead for my money. What do I do, Pat? She leaned forward, her voice fierce. You survive, and then you make them pay for underestimating you. Over the next 2 months, Patricia and I developed our own plan. We moved significant portions of my liquid assets into hidden accounts. We created false documents that would mislead anyone investigating my holdings. We set up surveillance on Michael and Jessica, hiring our own team of investigators to monitor their activities. What we discovered was worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just planning my death, they were planning to frame it as a tragic accident. Jessica had been researching maritime accidents, specifically cases where elderly individuals had fallen overboard during family outings. She'd even gone so far as to research the migration patterns of sharks along the California coast. They were going to take me out on the yacht, kill me, and make it look like I'd accidentally fallen overboard in shark-infested waters. The investigation would find an unfortunate accident. They'd inherit everything, and no one would ever suspect that my loving family had murdered me in cold blood. The final piece of evidence came 3 weeks before they made their move. Patricia's investigators captured audio of Michael and Jessica discussing the timeline. They were planning to do it during a family weekend trip to celebrate what Jessica called new beginnings for the Morrison family. New beginnings. as if my death was just the start of their real life together. I had to give them credit for their thoroughness. They'd covered every angle, planned for every contingency. They'd even researched how long it would take for my body to be found, if it ever was, and how that would affect the probate process. There was just one thing they hadn't planned for: the fact that their victim wasn't going to go quietly into that dark water. The night before our planned yacht trip, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, touching things that held memories: photos of Michael as a child, awards from business achievements, artwork I'd collected over the decades. Tomorrow, if everything went according to their plan, they'd inherit all of this. They'd sell what they could, keep what impressed their friends, and never think twice about the woman who'd died to give it to them. But I had my own surprise waiting. As I stood in my bedroom looking out at the ocean that was supposed to become my grave, I made myself a promise. I would survive whatever they had planned, and when I did, I would show them what it really meant to underestimate Margaret Morrison. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a family outing on the yacht. Jessica was unusually cheerful, humming as she packed what she claimed was a picnic lunch, but what I now knew were supplies for disposing of evidence. Michael was nervous, checking his phone constantly and avoiding eye contact with me. "Ready for a beautiful day on the water, Mom?" he asked, his voice artificially bright. "More ready than you know, sweetheart," I replied. As we drove to the marina, I wondered if this would be the last time I saw the California coastline from this perspective. By evening, I'd either be dead at the bottom of the Pacific, or I'd be starting the most important battle of my life. The yacht looked pristine in the morning sunlight, all gleaming white fiberglass and polished chrome. The endless summer had been my pride and joy for 15 years, a sanctuary where I'd entertained clients and celebrated family milestones. Now, it was going to be the scene of their attempted murder. We sailed out into international waters, making small talk about the weather and the dolphins we spotted along the way. Jessica took photos, creating what I now realized was a digital record of our happy family outing, proof for investigators that this had been a normal, innocent trip. About 2 hours out, when we were far enough from shore that radio calls would be difficult and rescue unlikely, Jessica suggested we have lunch on the upper deck. "The view is so much better up there," she said, "and there's more room to spread out." More room to dispose of a body, she meant. We climbed to the upper deck, where Jessica had set up an elaborate spread. Wine, cheese, fresh fruit, all designed to look like a celebration. She poured glasses of champagne and proposed a toast. "To family," she said, raising her glass with a smile that no longer fooled me. "And to new adventures." I raised my glass and smiled back. "To getting exactly what you deserve." They missed the warning in my words completely. As the afternoon wore on, I could sense them building up to their moment. Michael kept checking his watch, and Jessica was positioning herself closer to where I sat near the railing. The wind had picked up, and the boat was rocking more than before, perfect conditions for an accidental fall. Then Jessica made her move. "Margaret, come look at this," she said, pointing toward the horizon. "I think I see whales." I walked over to where she was standing near the port rail, playing my part as the unsuspecting victim. Michael positioned himself behind me, cutting off any retreat to the cabin below. "Where?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. That's when Jessica whispered those words that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. "Say hi to the sharks." Her hands hit my back with surprising force, and for a moment, I was airborne, sailing through the salt air toward the dark water below, but as I fell, I managed to grab onto the safety line that ran along the hull, stopping my descent just above the waterline. I hung there for a few seconds, listening to them celebrate above me, hearing Jessica's laughter and Michael's voice saying, "Finally, it's done." Then I let go and dropped into the water, disappearing beneath the surface as they sailed away, convinced they'd successfully murdered me for my fortune. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. Hidden beneath the yacht's hull was a small inflatable boat with supplies, GPS, and a satellite phone. Patricia's people had been tracking our location since we left the marina, but I wasn't ready to be rescued yet. I needed them to think they'd succeeded. I needed them to return home confident in their victory, ready to claim their inheritance and start their new life built on my death. Because waiting for them at the house was a surprise that would destroy them more completely than they'd tried to destroy me. As I floated in my life raft, watching their yacht disappear toward shore, I smiled despite the cold and the fear and the betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. They thought they were sailing home to collect $3 billion. Instead, they were sailing toward the end of everything they'd ever hoped to have. The rescue boat found me exactly where Patricia and I had planned, 3 miles from the coordinates where Jessica had pushed me overboard. To anyone monitoring radio communications, it would look like a miraculous rescue of a woman who'd managed to survive an accidental fall from her family yacht. Captain Rodriguez of the Coast Guard cutter looked genuinely concerned as his crew pulled me aboard. "Ma'am, are you injured? How long were you in the water?" I wrapped the emergency blanket around my shoulders and let my voice shake just enough to sound traumatized. "I don't know. Maybe 2 hours? We were having lunch and I leaned over to look at something Jessica saw. The boat rocked and I just went over. They must not have seen me fall." The lie came easily. I'd been practicing it for weeks. "Your family will be so relieved," Rodriguez said, handing me a cup of hot coffee. "We'll radio ahead and let them know you're safe." "No," I said quickly, then caught myself. "I mean, I'd like to surprise them. They must be worried sick, and I want to see their faces when they realize I'm okay." Rodriguez smiled. "I can understand that. Nothing like a close call to remind you how precious family is." If only he knew. The Coast Guard boat delivered me to a private dock Patricia had arranged, not the main marina where Michael and Jessica would be returning. I needed time to get home and into position before they arrived. Patricia was waiting with dry clothes and a car, her face tight with controlled anger. "How do you feel?" she asked as I changed in the back seat. "Like I just survived my own murder," I said, pulling on the fresh sweater she'd brought. "But also like I'm about to serve the best revenge dish ever prepared." Patricia had spent the last 2 months implementing our plan while I gathered evidence of Michael and Jessica's intentions. The beautiful thing about being worth $3 billion is that you can afford the very best help when you need to disappear assets and create illusions. As we drove toward my house, Patricia filled me in on the final preparations. "Everything's in place. The new will was filed this morning, backdated to last week with proper legal documentation. The asset transfers are complete, and our friend from the district attorney's office is standing by." I looked at my reflection in the car window. My hair was still damp from the ocean, and I looked older than my 68 years. But my eyes were alive with purpose. "How long do you think we have before they get back?" "Based on their yacht speed and current weather conditions, maybe 90 minutes. Enough time to set the stage." We pulled into my circular driveway just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left that morning, but everything had changed. This was no longer my sanctuary. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. Patricia and I moved quickly through the house, positioning cameras in locations Michael and Jessica wouldn't expect. We'd already installed hidden recording devices weeks ago, but tonight we needed visual documentation of their reactions. The legal team Patricia had assembled assured us that recordings made in my own home would be admissible in court, especially given the circumstances. I changed into comfortable clothes and sat in my favorite armchair in the living room. the one positioned to face the front entrance. Patricia took her position in the kitchen where she could monitor the security feeds on her laptop while staying out of sight. Then we waited. At exactly 7:43, I heard the distinctive sound of Michael's BMW pulling into the driveway. Through the window, I watched them get out of the car, their body language relaxed and celebratory. Jessica was actually smiling, probably thinking about all the ways she'd spend my money. I heard their key in the front door, then voices in the foyer. "I still can't believe it actually worked," Jessica was saying. "For a while there, I thought she might have figured something out." "She was always too trusting," Michael replied. "Besides, even if she had suspected something, what could she have done? We held all the cards." Their footsteps approached the living room. I arranged my face into a serene expression and waited. Jessica entered first, reaching for the light switch. When the lights came on and she saw me sitting there perfectly dry and very much alive, she let out a scream that probably scared every bird within a mile radius. Michael appeared behind her a second later and went completely white, like he'd seen a ghost. Which, in a way, he had. "Hello, darlings," I said calmly. "How was your sail back to shore?" Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Michael seemed frozen in place, his hand still on the doorframe. "Mom," he finally managed. "How are you here? We saw you fall. We searched for you." I tilted my head slightly, studying their faces. "Did you? Search for me, I mean? Because I have to say, for people who were supposedly looking for a woman who'd fallen overboard, you made remarkably good time getting back to shore." Jessica had recovered enough to attempt damage control. "Margaret, thank God you're safe. We were just about to call the Coast Guard. We've been frantic with worry." "Have you?" I stood up slowly, smoothing down my skirt. "Because based on the conversation I just heard in the foyer, it sounds like you were celebrating." The color drained from Jessica's face completely. Michael stepped forward, his legal training kicking in as he realized how much trouble they were in. "Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Whatever you think you heard, Betty, I heard my daughter-in-law say she couldn't believe it actually worked. I heard my son say I was too trusting and that you held all the cards." I walked closer to them, watching them back toward the wall. "What I'm curious about is what exactly worked and what cards you thought you were holding." Jessica made one last desperate attempt at innocence. "We were talking about surprising you with something, a business proposal we've been working on." I had to admire her persistence, even as it disgusted me. "Is that what you call researching accident scenarios and shark migration patterns? A business proposal?" The last of the color left Michael's face. He knew I had evidence, real evidence, not just overheard conversations. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Long enough to protect myself, long enough to make sure that when you finally made your move, I'd be ready for it." I smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "Long enough to completely destroy any chance you had of getting what you wanted." Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand the pressure we're under, the debts, the expectations. Everyone knows we're your heirs. They expect us to live a certain way. So you decided to murder me for my money." The words hung in the air like an accusation from beyond the grave. Michael sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said. "It was supposed to look like an accident. You weren't supposed to suffer." "How considerate of you." I walked to the window and looked out at the ocean where they'd tried to kill me just hours before. "Tell me, Michael, at what point did you decide your mother's life was worth less than her bank account?" He looked up at me with tears in his eyes, and for a moment, I saw the little boy I'd raised. "When Jessica showed me how much money we could have if we didn't have to wait for you to die naturally. When she made me see that you were just holding us back from our real potential." I turned to Jessica, who was standing pressed against the wall like she wanted to disappear into it. "And you, my dear daughter-in-law, How long have you been planning this? Since the prenup, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Since I realized that Michael would inherit everything, but I'd only get what he chose to give me. I needed to make sure we both had access to the full amount. The prenup? I'd insisted on it before their wedding, wanting to protect the family assets. It had seemed like a reasonable precaution at the time. I never imagined it would become her motive for murder. So, you researched how to kill me and make it look accidental. You found out about shark activity in these waters. You planned every detail. I walked back toward them, my voice getting stronger with each word. You bought equipment to weigh down my body. You practiced your story about how I accidentally fell overboard. You even researched how long it would take for the investigation to conclude, so you'd know when you could start spending my money. Jessica straightened up, some of her defiance returning. It would have been quick. You wouldn't have suffered. And we would have used the money for good things, important things, not just sitting on it like you do. I stared at her for a long moment, marveling at her ability to justify attempted murder. Used it for good things? Is that what you call the gambling debts you've racked up? The high-end shopping sprees? The luxury vacations you've been taking while telling me you were at business conferences? Her face went white again. She hadn't known I was aware of her spending habits. Yes, Jessica, I know about the debts. I know about the money you've been stealing from Michael's accounts to cover your losses. I know about the threats from the people you owe money to. I know that you weren't just planning to kill me for the inheritance. You were planning to kill me because you desperately needed cash to stay alive yourself. Michael looked at Jessica with shock. What is she talking about? What debts? Jessica's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed completely. Michael, I can explain. It's not as bad as she's making it sound. How bad is it? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. $3 million, I answered for her. She owes $3 million to some very unpleasant people who have made it clear that they expect payment soon. Isn't that right, Jessica? Jessica slumped against the wall, defeated. How do you know all this? Because unlike you, when I want information about someone, I hire professionals instead of amateurs. I walked to my desk and picked up a thick folder. I know about every debt, every threat, every lie you've told my son. I know about the life insurance policies you took out on me without my knowledge. I know about the meetings with the state lawyers and the research into maritime accidents. I threw the folder at their feet, papers scattering across the expensive rug. I know everything. Michael bent down and started picking up papers, his hands shaking as he read. Financial records, photographs, transcripts of conversations, evidence of a conspiracy that went far deeper than even he had realized. Jessica, you told me this was just about getting our inheritance early. You said it was just about not having to wait for Mom to die naturally. He looked up at her with betrayal written across his face. You didn't tell me you were desperate. You didn't tell me people were threatening you. I was protecting you, she said weakly. You were using me. Michael stood up, still holding the papers. You manipulated me into trying to kill my own mother because you needed money to pay off gambling debts. I watched this realization destroy my son, and despite everything he'd done, my heart broke for him. He'd been manipulated by a woman who saw him as nothing more than a path to money, just like she'd seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Michael, I said gently, Jessica isn't the woman you think she is. She never was. He looked at me with eyes full of pain and regret. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I let this happen. I don't know how I became someone who could try to hurt you. I know exactly how it happened, I said. The same way these things always happen. Little compromises that lead to bigger ones, small lies that grow into large deceptions, and a woman who was very good at making you believe that love meant doing terrible things. Jessica pushed herself off the wall, anger replacing her defeated posture. Don't you dare try to put this all on me. Michael made his own choices. He wanted the money just as much as I did. Did he? I looked at my son, who was staring at the floor. Michael, if Jessica hadn't been in debt to dangerous people, would you have gone through with this plan? He was quiet for a long time before answering. I don't know. Maybe not. I keep telling myself I would have found another way, but I honestly don't know anymore. It was the most honest thing he'd said all evening. Well, I said, walking back to my chair, I suppose we'll never know for sure, but I do know what happens next. Both of them looked at me with fear in their eyes. You're going to sit down, you're going to listen to what I have to say, and then you're going to learn exactly what it costs to try to murder Margaret Morrison for her money. As they reluctantly took seats on the couch across from me, I couldn't help but think about how different this scene was from what they'd imagined when they sailed home tonight. They'd expected to return to an empty house and start making calls to report my tragic accident. Instead, they were sitting in my living room while I prepared to destroy their lives as thoroughly as they'd tried to destroy Kin. Patricia appeared in the doorway, laptop in hand. Everything's been recorded, she said, audio and video, perfect quality. Jessica looked back and forth between us with growing panic. You planned this. You knew what we were going to do. Of course I planned this, I said. Did you really think you could research my murder for months without me finding out? Did you think I built a $3 billion empire by being careless about threats to my well-being? Michael looked up at me with something that might have been respect, mixed with his fear. How long have you known? Long enough to move my assets somewhere you'll never find them, long enough to change my will, and long enough to gather evidence that will put both of you in prison for attempted murder. The room fell silent, except for the sound of the ocean waves outside, the same ocean where they'd tried to feed me to the sharks just hours before. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to confess everything to the authorities. You're going to plead guilty to attempted murder, and you're going to accept whatever sentence they give you without appeal or complaint. And if we don't? Jessica asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. I smiled, and this time there was nothing pleasant about it at all. Then I release all the evidence I've gathered to the media, the district attorney, and every law enforcement agency in California. Your faces will be on every news channel as the couple who tried to murder a 68-year-old woman for her inheritance. You'll spend the rest of your lives in prison, and every person you've ever known will see exactly what kind of monsters you really are. Patricia stepped forward. There's also the matter of the $3 million Jessica owes to some very unforgiving people. People who won't care that she's in prison when they come looking for their money. Jessica's face went completely white. In all their planning, they hadn't considered what would happen to her debts if their plan failed. So, you see, I said, settling back in my chair, you don't really have any choice in the matter. The only question is whether you face the consequences with some dignity, or whether I have to drag you kicking and screaming into the justice you've earned. As I watched my son and daughter-in-law process the complete destruction of their lives, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but a deep, overwhelming sadness. This should have been a family evening, maybe a pleasant dinner after a day on the water. Instead, it was the night I learned that the people I loved most in the world had tried to kill me for money. But it was also the night I proved that Margaret Morrison wasn't going down without a fight. The real reckoning was just beginning. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. Michael sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with what I realized were sobs. Jessica stared at the floor, her mind probably racing through possible escape routes that didn't exist. I stood up and walked to the bar cart in the corner, pouring myself a generous glass of brandy. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be, considering I'd been murdered and resurrected in the span of a single day. Would either of you like a drink? I asked, the picture of gracious hostility. It might help steady your nerves for what comes next. Jessica looked up at me with eyes full of hate. What comes next? You've already destroyed us. What more could you possibly want? I took a sip of brandy and let it burn away the taste of salt water that still lingered in my mouth. What I want, Jessica, is answers. Real answers. Not the convenient lies you've been telling yourselves to justify attempted murder. I walked back to my chair and sat down, studying their faces in the lamplight. I want to understand how my son became someone who could watch his wife push his mother off a yacht and smile about it. I want to know how a woman I welcomed into my family with open arms could whisper threats about sharks as she tried to kill me. Michael finally looked up, his face streaked with tears. Mom, I know you'll never forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But please believe me when I say I never wanted it to come to this. Then how did it come to this? I asked. Walk me through it, Michael. When was the first moment you thought about killing me for money? He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, looking younger than his 35 years. It wasn't like that. It never started as wanting to kill you. It started as just wishing things were different. Different how? Jessica and I have been struggling more than you knew. The house payments, her business expenses, the lifestyle everyone expects us to maintain because we're your heirs. He looked at his wife with something that might have been resentment. Jessica kept saying we were living like paupers while sitting on a fortune we couldn't touch. I turned to Jessica. Is that how you saw it? Living like paupers? Jessica's laugh was bitter. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to the heir of a $3 billion fortune, but having to ask permission to spend money on anything significant? Do you know how humiliating it is when people assume we're wealthy, but we're actually living on Michael's salary? Michael's very generous salary, I corrected. The salary I pay him as president of Morrison Industries, which is considerably more than most people his age earn. But it's not $3 billion, Jessica shot back. It's not even close to what we could have if we didn't have to wait for you to die of old age. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. This woman had been sitting at my dinner table for 3 years, celebrating holidays with me, calling me Mom, all while calculating how much longer she'd have to wait for me to die naturally. So you decided to speed up the process, I said quietly. Jessica decided, Michael said, his voice gaining strength. She came to me with research about maritime accidents. She said she'd found a way to solve all our problems at once. And you went along with it, not at first. Michael looked at me with desperate eyes, as if my understanding could somehow absolve him. At first I told her she was crazy, that I'd never hurt you. But she kept pushing, kept showing me numbers, kept talking about what we could do with the money. I turned back to Jessica. What kind of numbers? Jessica straightened up, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the calculating woman who'd spent months planning my death. Did you know that your money is losing purchasing power every year it sits in conservative investments? Did you know that with proper management we could double the fortune within 5 years? And you couldn't do that without killing me? You're too risk-averse, too sentimental about old investments that don't perform, too attached to properties that tie up capital. Jessica's voice grew stronger as she warmed to her topic. You built an empire, Margaret, but you're not the right person to grow it in today's market. I stared at her, amazed by her audacity. So murdering me was really about portfolio optimization? It was about maximizing our potential, she said, without a trace of irony. Michael looked at his wife as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Jesus, Jessica, listen to yourself. You're talking about killing my mother like it's a business decision. Everything is a business decision, Jessica replied coldly. Love doesn't pay debts. Sentiment doesn't generate returns. Your mother built her fortune by making hard choices, and this was just another hard choice. I set down my brandy glass and leaned forward. You're absolutely right about one thing, Jessica. I did build my fortune by making hard choices. And tonight, I'm making another one. Patricia appeared in the doorway again, this time with a phone in her hand. The district attorney is on the line, she said. Should I tell her you're ready? Both Michael and Jessica went pale. They'd been so focused on their justifications and explanations that they'd forgotten the criminal consequences awaiting them. Wait, Michael said, standing up quickly. Mom, please. There has to be another way to handle this. We're family. Are we? I asked. Because family members don't usually try to murder each other for inheritance money. I know what we did was unforgivable, but we're still your family. Your only family. If you send us to prison, you'll be completely alone. It was a low blow, and we all knew it. Michael was trying to use my fear of loneliness against me. The same loneliness that had made me so happy to welcome Jessica into our family in the first place. You know what's worse than being alone, Michael? Being surrounded by people who are planning to kill you. Jessica stood up beside her husband, and I could see her mind working frantically. Margaret, what if we could make this right? What if we could pay you back somehow, make amends for what we tried to do? Pay me back? I almost laughed. Jessica, you tried to murder me and feed me to sharks. What exactly did you have in mind for making amends? A fruit basket? We could work for you, Michael said desperately. We could earn your forgiveness. I could prove to you that I'm not the person who was capable of this. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and trusted with my business empire. Michael, do you honestly believe I could ever trust you again? Do you think I could ever sleep peacefully knowing that you'd already tried to kill me once for money? He sank back into the couch, defeated. No, I guess not. Besides, I continued, there's still the matter of Jessica's debts to some very dangerous people. Even if I were inclined to forgive attempted murder, which I'm not, how do you propose we handle the $3 million she owes to people who break legs for late payments? Jessica's composure cracked again. We could pay them back. If you gave us access to even a small portion of the inheritance, we could clear the debts and start over. You want me to pay off your gambling debts? After you tried to murder me? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark ocean. Jessica, you have a remarkable talent for missing the point. Patricia cleared her throat from the doorway. The district attorney is still holding. I turned back to Michael and Jessica, who were clutching each other's hands like passengers on a sinking ship. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to answer that call, and I'm going to tell the district attorney everything. You're going to be arrested tonight, and tomorrow you're going to begin paying for your crimes. Mom, please, Michael whispered. The time for please was before you tried to kill me, I said firmly. The time for please was any of the dozens of moments over the past few months when you could have come to me with the truth about Jessica's problems. The time for please was when you still had a choice between being my son and being a murderer. I walked toward Patricia, then stopped and turned back to them. There is one thing I'm curious about, though. After you killed me and inherited the money, how long do you think your marriage would have lasted? They looked at each other with confusion. I mean, Jessica, once you had access to billions of dollars, how long before Michael became expendable too? And Michael, once you realized what kind of woman you'd married, how long before you started worrying about becoming her next victim? The question hung in the air between them, and I could see them both considering it for the first time. Jessica, who'd manipulated Michael into attempting murder, certainly had the capacity to eliminate him if he became inconvenient. And Michael, who was just beginning to understand the depth of his wife's deception, was starting to realize how much danger he'd put himself in. You never thought about that, did you? I continued. You were so focused on killing me and getting the money that you never considered what would happen to your relationship afterward. Murder has a way of changing people, and neither of you would have been the same person after watching me drown." Jessica's face had gone white again. Michael was staring at her with growing horror as he processed the implications of what I was saying. "Jessica," he said slowly, "would you have killed me too? Eventually." She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. The calculation in her eyes as she considered the question was answer enough. Michael pulled his hands away from hers and moved to the other end of the couch. "Oh my God, you would have. Once you had the money and didn't need me anymore, you would have killed me too. Michael, that's ridiculous. I love you." "No," he said, his voice getting stronger. "You love money. You love what I could give you access to. But you don't love me any more than you loved Mom." I watched this realization destroy whatever was left of their relationship and felt a grim satisfaction. They'd tried to use family bonds to manipulate me into not prosecuting them. But those same bonds had been poisoned by their actions. "Patricia," I called, "put the district attorney through." As Patricia handed me the phone, Michael made one last desperate attempt. "Mom, if you do this, you'll destroy any chance we ever had of rebuilding our relationship. You'll lose me forever." I took the phone and looked at my son with eyes that held more sadness than anger. "Michael, I lost you the moment you decided to watch your wife push me off that yacht. Everything else is just paperwork." Then I lifted the phone to my ear. "District Attorney Chen, this is Margaret Morrison. I have something you need to hear." As I began recounting the events of the day to the prosecutor, I watched Michael and Jessica sitting on my couch, their faces etched with the realization that their lives as they knew them were over. In a few hours, they'd be in jail cells, beginning the long journey toward whatever justice the legal system deemed appropriate for attempted murder. But even as I spoke to the district attorney, even as I provided the evidence that would convict them, I couldn't shake the deep sadness that settled in my chest like a stone. I'd survived their attempt to kill me. I'd outmaneuvered their conspiracy, and I was about to see them face consequences for their crimes. So why did victory feel so much like loss? The answer came to me as I watched Michael break down completely, his face in his hands as the weight of his choices finally crushed him. I'd won this battle, but in winning it, I'd lost the only family I had left. For $3 billion, I was about to become the loneliest woman in California. And as the district attorney assured me that arrests would be made within the hour, I wondered if Jessica had been right about one thing. Maybe love really didn't pay debts after all. The police arrived at 9:37, their red and blue lights painting my living room walls in alternating colors of justice. I watched from my window as Detective Sarah Martinez and her partner stepped out of their unmarked sedan, followed by two uniformed officers in a patrol car. I'd known Sarah for years through various charity events. She was a smart, thorough investigator who'd worked her way up from beat cop to detective in one of the toughest precincts in Los Angeles. If anyone could handle this case properly, it was her. Patricia let them in while I finished my conversation with District Attorney Chen. The plan was simple. Michael and Jessica would be arrested on charges of attempted murder and conspiracy. The evidence we'd gathered over the past months, combined with their recorded confessions from tonight, would make conviction almost certain. "Mrs. Morrison," Detective Martinez said as she entered the living room, her eyes taking in the scene with professional assessment. "I understand you've had quite an evening." "That's one way to put it," I replied, gesturing toward the couch where Michael and Jessica sat in stunned silence. "Detective Martinez, I'd like you to meet my son Michael and his wife Jessica. As of this afternoon, they're attempted murderers." Martinez looked at the young couple, then back at me. "Are you certain you want to proceed with formal charges? Family situations like this can sometimes be resolved through other means. It was a kind offer, the sort of discretion that wealthy families often received when dealing with scandals. But kindness wasn't what this situation called for. Detective, 6 hours ago, these two people pushed me off a yacht in shark-infested waters and sailed away, believing they'd successfully murdered me for my inheritance. I'm absolutely certain I want to proceed with charges. Martinez nodded and gestured to her partner, Detective Williams, who began reading Michael and Jessica their rights. The familiar words seemed to echo strangely in my elegant living room, transforming my home into a crime scene. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Jessica found her voice first. This is insane. We never actually hurt her. She's fine. No harm was done. Ma'am, Detective Williams said patiently, attempting to commit murder is still a felony, regardless of whether the attempt was successful. Michael stood up slowly, holding out his hands for the handcuffs. Mom, I want you to know that I'm glad you survived. Whatever happens to me, I'm glad you're alive. I looked at my son, this man who bore such a strong resemblance to his father, and felt my heart break all over again. Are you, Michael? Are you really glad? Or are you just glad that you won't have to live with the guilt of actually succeeding? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. As the officers led them toward the door, Jessica turned back to me with fury in her eyes. You think you've won, but you haven't. You're going to spend the rest of your life alone, surrounded by your precious money and your empty house. At least we'll have each other. I almost smiled at her naivety. Jessica, dear, you're about to learn that attempted murder charges tend to strain even the strongest marriages. Give it 6 months before you're testifying against each other for reduced sentences. The last thing I saw before they disappeared into the police cars was Michael's face in the back window, looking younger and more lost than I'd ever seen him. Then the red and blue lights faded down my driveway, taking my family away forever. Patricia and I stood in the sudden silence of my living room, surrounded by the evidence of the evening's revelations. Papers scattered across the floor, brandy glasses on side tables, and the lingering scent of fear and betrayal in the air. How are you holding up? Patricia asked, settling into the chair Michael had vacated. I'm not sure yet, I admitted, pouring myself another brandy. I keep waiting for it to hit me, but right now I just feel numb. That's shock. It's normal after trauma, even when you've prepared for it. I sat down across from her and took a sip of brandy, letting the warmth chase away the chill that had settled in my bones. Pat, did I do the right thing? You survived an attempted murder and ensured your attackers faced justice. Yes, Margaret, you did the right thing. But they're my family. Michael is my son. Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. Margaret, listen to me carefully. The people who got arrested tonight are not your family. Your family wouldn't have tried to kill you for money. Those people were strangers wearing familiar faces. I knew she was right, but knowing it intellectually didn't make it hurt less emotionally. I keep thinking about when Michael was little. He used to have nightmares, and I'd sit with him until he fell back asleep. I taught him to ride a bike, helped him with homework, cheered at his soccer games. How does that little boy become someone who can watch his mother get pushed off a yacht? The same way a loving parent becomes someone who has to have her own child arrested, Patricia said gently. Life changes people, sometimes in ways we never expect. I walked to the mantelpiece where family photos still smiled down at us. Michael's high school graduation, his wedding day, Christmas mornings from years past. All those memories felt contaminated now, colored by the knowledge of how the story ended. I need to call David, I said, referring to my attorney. There will be media attention once this becomes public. I need to be prepared. Already done, Patricia said. He's flying back from New York tonight. He'll be here first thing tomorrow to help you navigate the legal and public relations aspects. I shouldn't have been surprised. Patricia had been anticipating my needs for decades. It's what made her such a valuable friend and business partner. What about the company? The board will need to be notified. Michael was president, and now you'll need a new president, Patricia finished. We'll deal with that tomorrow, too. Tonight, you need to process what happened and start healing. Healing? It seemed like an impossible task. How do you heal from learning that your only child wanted you dead? How do you move forward when the people you loved most in the world betrayed you in the most fundamental way possible? My phone rang, startling us both. The caller ID showed my housekeeper's number. Mrs. Morrison? Elena's voice was full of concern. I saw the police cars leaving. Is everything all right? Elena Martinez had worked for me for 15 years. She was Detective Martinez's aunt, as it happened, one of those small world coincidences that make Los Angeles feel like a village sometimes. She lived in the small apartment above the garage and managed my household with quiet efficiency. Elena, I'm fine, but there's been some trouble. Michael and Jessica have been arrested. I'll explain everything tomorrow, but tonight, I just need you to know that we're all safe. There was a long pause. Should I prepare the guest room for you, Mrs. Morrison? Sometimes after difficult times, people don't want to sleep in their regular bedroom. It was a thoughtful offer. My bedroom overlooked the ocean where I'd nearly died just hours ago. The idea of lying in bed, listening to waves that had almost been my grave, wasn't appealing. That would be lovely, Elena, thank you. After I hung up, Patricia and I continued sitting in the quiet living room, processing the magnitude of what had happened. The house felt different now, larger somehow, as if Michael and Jessica's absence had created a vacuum that made every sound echo. I should probably eat something, I said eventually. I haven't had food since breakfast. I'll make you something, Patricia offered, but I shook my head. No, I need to do normal things. I need to prove to myself that I can still function after this. In the kitchen, I made myself a simple sandwich and tried to pretend it was just a normal evening. But normal evenings didn't include having your family arrested for attempted murder. Normal evenings didn't include surviving your own death and coming home to destroy the people who'd tried to kill you. As I ate, I found myself thinking about Jessica's parting words. She'd said I would spend the rest of my life alone, surrounded by money and emptiness. The cruel part was that she was probably right. At 68, I wasn't likely to build a new family or find new people to trust completely, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe being alone was better than being surrounded by people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth. Maybe solitude was preferable to the constant worry about who might be planning my demise. My phone buzzed with a text message. I didn't recognize the number, but the message made my blood run cold. We know what happened tonight. $3 million doesn't disappear just because Jessica's in jail. You have 48 hours. I showed the message to Patricia, who immediately called Detective Martinez. Within minutes, my house was swarming with police again, this time to investigate threats from Jessica's creditors. Mrs. Morrison, Detective Martinez said as her team checked the security systems, these people don't play games. If Jessica owes them money, they'll expect someone to pay, regardless of her legal situation. How much danger am I in? Hard to say. They might see you as responsible for Jessica's debts since she's married to your heir. Or they might just be trying to pressure you into paying to avoid trouble. I looked at Patricia, who was already on her phone arranging for additional security. So Jessica's problems have become my problems, even though she tried to kill me? Unfortunately, yes. Criminal debt doesn't follow normal legal channels. As police officers stationed themselves around my property and private security specialists began installing additional monitoring equipment, I realized that surviving Jessica's murder attempt was only the beginning of my troubles. Her gambling debts had opened a new chapter in this nightmare, one where professional criminals might succeed, where amateur murderers had failed. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by law enforcement officers, and wondered if Jessica had planned this too. Had she known that her creditors would come after me if something happened to her? Was this her final revenge for my survival, ensuring that even from jail she could continue to threaten my life? The thought was almost admirable in its cruelty. Even facing prison, Jessica was still finding ways to make me pay for being alive. As the security team finished their installations and the police completed their initial investigation, Detective Martinez sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." I nodded, though I was exhausted and wanted nothing more than to sleep. "Are you absolutely certain you want to pursue charges against your son and daughter-in-law? Because once this becomes public, once it goes to trial, your entire life will be under scrutiny. The media, the defendant's lawyers, Jessica's creditors, everyone will be looking at you. Are you prepared for that level of exposure?" I thought about the question seriously. Was I prepared to have my life dissected in public? Was I ready for the media circus that would surely follow? Was I strong enough to testify against my own son in open court? Then I thought about the moment when Jessica pushed me off the yacht, the moment when I realized that the people I loved most wanted me dead. I thought about Michael's smile as he watched me fall toward the dark water. "Detective Martinez," I said, my voice steady despite my exhaustion, "I didn't survive attempted murder just to let my attackers walk free, because prosecution might be inconvenient. Yes, I'm prepared for whatever comes next." She nodded with what looked like respect. "Good, because tomorrow the real fight begins." As the last of the police officers left and Patricia helped me gather my things for the guest room, I realized that Detective Martinez was absolutely right, and tonight had been about survival and justice. Tomorrow would be about something much harder, living with the consequences of both. I climbed the stairs to the guest room, looking out at the ocean one more time before closing the curtains. Somewhere out there in the dark water, Jessica had expected my body to be feeding sharks by now. Instead, I was preparing to send her and my son to prison while dealing with threats from the criminals she owed money to. It wasn't the ending to this day that anyone had expected, but it was the ending I'd chosen. And tomorrow, I'd have to live with that choice, along with all the complications it brought. As I finally settled into the unfamiliar bed, I realized that Jessica had been wrong about one thing. I wasn't alone because I had money. I was alone because the people who should have loved me had chosen money over love. The difference might seem small, but it was everything. 6 months later, I sat in the courthouse listening to my son's sentencing. The trial had been everything Detective Martinez warned it would be, and worse. Every detail of my life had been dissected by defense attorneys trying to portray me as a controlling matriarch who'd driven her family to desperation. The media had camped outside of my house for weeks, turning my attempted murder into entertainment for the evening news. Through it all, I'd held my head high and told the truth. Michael received 12 years for conspiracy to commit murder. His lawyer had argued for leniency, claiming he'd been manipulated by his wife and was genuinely remorseful. The judge wasn't moved by his tears. Jessica received 15 years. Her gambling addiction wasn't considered a mitigating factor, and the premeditated nature of her planning worked against her. She'd shown no remorse throughout the trial, maintaining that she'd been trying to save the family fortune from my mismanagement. As the judge's gavel fell for the final time, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a hollow emptiness where my family used to be. Patricia waited for me outside the courtroom, shielding me from the cameras and reporters who still hounded my every public appearance. We climbed into the armored car I'd been forced to purchase after Jessica's creditors made good on their threats with a home invasion attempt 3 months earlier. How are you holding up? Patricia asked as we drove through downtown Los Angeles. I'm tired, Pat. Bone-deep tired in a way that sleep can't fix. The appeals process will take years, but this part is over. You can start rebuilding now. Rebuilding. The word seemed both impossible and necessary. Over the past 6 months, I'd restructured Morrison Industries completely. Patricia now served as president, and we'd brought in new leadership throughout the company. The business was thriving, despite the scandal, or perhaps because of it. There's nothing like a family murder trial to generate publicity. I've been thinking about what you said months ago, I told Patricia as we pulled into my driveway. About the people who got arrested not being my real family. And you were right, but it doesn't make it hurt less. I keep wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have seen what Jessica was doing to Michael before it went too far. Patricia helped me out of the car and past the security checkpoint that now guarded my front door. Living like a fortress wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. Jessica's creditors had eventually been satisfied through a negotiated settlement, but the experience had taught me that wealth makes you a target in ways I'd never fully appreciated. Inside the house, Elena had prepared lunch and arranged fresh flowers throughout the main rooms. She'd become more than a housekeeper over the past months, serving as a buffer between me and the outside world when the pressure became too intense. Mrs. Morrison, she said as we entered, there are some letters for you. I put them on your desk. I nodded and headed to my study, Patricia following behind. The desk held the usual stack of correspondence, business matters, charity requests, and condolence letters from people who somehow thought having your family convicted of attempted murder was similar to losing them to natural causes. But one letter stood out. The return address was from the state prison where Michael was serving his sentence. I stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. Michael's handwriting looked different, smaller somehow, as if prison had diminished even his penmanship. Mom, the letter began, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness for what I did to you. But I need you to know that I think about that day every moment of every day. I think about the look on your face when Jessica pushed you, and I think about how I just stood there and let it happen. I've had a lot of time to think about who I became and how I got there. The therapist here says I was manipulated, that Jessica used psychological techniques to break down my resistance to the idea of hurting you. Maybe that's true, but it doesn't excuse what I chose to do. I chose to believe that money was more important than your life. I chose to participate in planning your murder. I chose to stand on that yacht and watch you fall into the ocean. Those were my choices, regardless of Jessica's influence. I know you probably never want to see me again, and I understand that. But if you could find it in your heart to visit me someday, I would like the chance to apologize in person. Not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear me say I'm sorry while looking you in the eyes. I love you, Mom. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I do love you. I'm sorry it took losing you to remember that. Your son, Michael. I set the letter down and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean that had almost been my grave. Patricia read the letter over my shoulder, then put a gentle hand on my arm. What do you think? She asked. I think he means it, I said quietly. I think he's genuinely sorry and genuinely remorseful. But I also think sorry doesn't bring back the trust he destroyed. Sorry doesn't erase the memory of his smile when he thought I was drowning. Are you going to visit him? I considered the question. Part of me wanted to see Michael, wanted to look into his eyes and see if the man I'd raised was still there somewhere, beneath the person who'd tried to kill me. But another part of me, the part that had spent 6 months in therapy learning to process trauma and betrayal, wasn't ready for that conversation. Maybe someday, I said finally, but not yet. I'm still healing from what he did to me. I can't start helping him heal until I'm stronger myself. Patricia nodded understanding. What about Jessica? Any word from her? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jessica's latest letter blamed me for ruining her life by surviving her murder attempt. Apparently, if I'd just died like I was supposed to, everyone would be happy now. Unrepentant to the end. Some people never learn to take responsibility for their choices. We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing business matters and discussing the foundation I was establishing to help other elderly victims of family financial abuse. It turned out that attempted murder by relatives wasn't as rare as I'd hoped. There were dozens of cases across the country of adult children trying to speed up their inheritance through violence. That evening, I sat alone in my living room with a glass of wine, thinking about the year that had transformed my life so completely. 12 months ago, I'd been a wealthy widow with a loving son and a daughter-in-law I trusted. Tonight, I was a wealthy widow with a son in prison and scars that would never fully heal. But I was alive. Despite their best efforts, despite their careful planning, despite the sharks they'd hoped would finish what they started, I was alive. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Elena answered it and returned with a young woman I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Sarah Chen. She says she's Jessica's sister." I looked at the woman standing nervously in my doorway. She had Jessica's features, but none of her calculating coldness. Where Jessica's eyes had always seemed to be measuring and evaluating, Sarah's were filled with genuine distress. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know you probably don't want to see anyone related to Jessica, but I needed to speak with you." I gestured for her to sit down, curious despite myself. "What can I do for you, Sarah?" "I wanted to apologize for what my sister did to you. I wanted you to know that our family is horrified by her actions. We had no idea about the gambling, the debts, or the plot to hurt you." "I appreciate that, but you're not responsible for your sister's choices." Sarah twisted her hands in her lap, clearly struggling with whatever she'd come to say. "There's something else. Something Jessica made me promise never to tell you. But after what happened, I can't keep quiet anymore." I felt a familiar chill, the same sensation I'd experienced when I first discovered Jessica's true nature. "What is it?" "Jessica didn't just target your family randomly. She researched you for months before she ever met Michael. She found out about your wealth, your loneliness after your husband died, your close relationship with your son. She planned everything from the beginning, including making Michael fall in love with her." The words hit me like physical blows. "What do you mean, she planned it?" "Jessica worked in finance, but not the kind she told you about. She worked for a company that specialized in finding wealthy targets for various scams. When she learned about Michael and your family's wealth, she quit her job and dedicated herself to becoming the perfect woman for your son." I gripped the arms of my chair, feeling the room spin slightly. She engineered their entire relationship? The MBA from Wharton was real, and she was genuinely smart about business. But everything else, her personality, her interests, even the way she dressed, it was all designed to appeal to Michael and gain your approval. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "She used to practice conversations in the mirror, rehearsing responses that would make you trust her." Patricia, who'd been listening from the doorway, came and sat beside me. "Sarah, why are you telling us this now?" "Because Mrs. Morrison deserves to know the truth, and because Jessica is trying to appeal her sentence by claiming she was driven to desperation by family pressure. She's painting herself as a victim of circumstances, and it's not true. This was always her plan." I thought about the 3 years Jessica had been part of our family. Every holiday dinner, every business discussion, every moment when I'd felt grateful that Michael had found someone so perfect for him. It had all been an elaborate performance designed to position her for the ultimate theft. "Does Michael know this?" I asked. Sarah shook her head. "I don't think so. Jessica was very good at compartmentalizing. She became the character she was playing so completely that even she might have believed it sometimes. After Sarah left, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information. It was almost worse than the original betrayal, at least when I'd thought Jessica had genuinely loved Michael before greed corrupted her. There had been something human about her motivation. Learning that our entire relationship had been a calculated deception felt like being murdered all over again. "I have to tell Michael," I said finally. "Are you sure that's wise?" Patricia asked. "He's already struggling with guilt and remorse. Learning that his entire marriage was a lie might destroy him completely. He deserves to know the truth. And maybe understanding how thoroughly he was manipulated will help him forgive himself enough to start healing." 3 days later, I found myself sitting across from my son in a prison visiting room. He looked older than his 36 years, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult self-examination. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I didn't think you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted. "But we need to talk. And some conversations can't happen in letters." I told him about Sarah's visit, about Jessica's calculated deception, about the months of research and planning that had gone into targeting our family. I watched his face cycle through disbelief, horror, and finally, a kind of devastated understanding. "She never loved me," he said quietly. "Our entire relationship was a lie." "I'm sorry, Michael. I know that's painful to hear." He was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of Jessica's betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been since I'd arrived. "In a strange way, it helps. I've been trying to understand how I became someone who could plan your murder, and I kept coming back to the fact that it felt like someone else was making those decisions. Now I understand why." "Michael, I need you to understand something. Learning about Jessica's manipulation doesn't excuse what you did, but it does help explain it. You were the victim of a very sophisticated psychological campaign designed to break down your moral resistance. Does that mean you can forgive me?" I looked at my son, this man who'd been shaped by lies and manipulation into someone capable of terrible things. The question of forgiveness was complicated, layered with hurt and love and disappointment and hope. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a process, and I'm not there yet. But I want to get there, Michael. For both of us." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll spend every day of the next 12 years trying to become someone worthy of your forgiveness." "Don't do it for me," I said. "Do it for yourself. Do it because you deserve to be better than what Jessica turned you into." As I drove home from the prison, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the naive hope that things could go back to the way they were before, but the mature hope that something new and better could be built from the ruins of what we'd lost. 6 months later, I received another letter from Michael. This one was different. Instead of guilt and self-recrimination, it was filled with news about his education program in prison, his work with other inmates, and his plans for rehabilitation. He was becoming someone new, someone stronger than the man Jessica had manipulated into attempted murder. I wrote back. It was the first letter I'd sent to either of my family members since their arrests, and it felt like taking the first step on a very long journey. I didn't know where that journey would lead, or whether we'd ever be able to rebuild something resembling a normal relationship. But I knew that trying was better than giving up entirely. 1 year after the trial ended, I stood on the deck of a new yacht, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. Patricia stood beside me, along with Elena and several other friends I'd grown closer to during the long months of healing. The new boat was smaller than the endless summer, more intimate. I'd named it Second Chance, partly as a reminder of my own survival, and partly as a promise that the ocean would not become a source of permanent fear. "Any regrets?" Patricia asked as we sailed through the calm evening waters. I thought about the question carefully. Did I regret surviving Jessica's murder attempt? Never. Did I regret having Michael and Jessica prosecuted? No, though the process had been painful. Did I regret the years I'd lost to their deception? Of course. I regret that it took attempted murder to show me who they really were, I said finally. But I don't regret surviving long enough to see justice done. And Michael? Any regrets about trying to rebuild that relationship? I smiled, thinking about his latest letter describing his work teaching literacy to fellow inmates. Michael is becoming someone I'm proud to call my son again. It's taken 3 years, and it's not complete yet, but he's doing the work to heal from what Jessica did to him and what he did to me. What about when he gets out? Will you be ready to have him back in your life? I'll be ready to find out, I said. He'll be a different person by then, and so will I. Maybe the people we become will be capable of having a healthy relationship. Maybe we'll finally understand that love isn't about money or inheritance or what someone can give you. Maybe we'll learn that real family is built on trust and respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. As the boat carried us back toward shore, I thought about Jessica, still serving her sentence, and still refusing to take responsibility for her actions. Her appeals had been denied, and she'd spend the next decade in prison. Sometimes I wondered if she'd ever understand the magnitude of what she'd destroyed, or if she'd spend the rest of her life believing she was the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own downfall. But Jessica's inability to change didn't define my story anymore. I'd survived her attempt to kill me, and I'd survived the long journey back to something resembling peace. I'd built new relationships based on honesty instead of manipulation, and I'd learned to trust my instincts about people instead of hoping that love could overcome any obstacle. Most importantly, I'd learned that being alone wasn't the worst thing that could happen to someone. Being surrounded by people who wished you were dead was much worse. As we docked at the marina and prepared to head home, I felt grateful for the life I'd rebuilt from the wreckage of betrayal. It wasn't the life I'd planned, and it bore the scars of trauma that would never fully fade. But it was mine, built on truth instead of lies, and populated by people who loved me for who I was rather than what I could give them. That evening, I sat in my study writing a letter to Michael. I told him about the new yacht, about the Foundation's work helping other elderly victims of family abuse, and about the book I was writing about surviving betrayal and rebuilding trust. "I'm proud of the man you're becoming," I wrote. "You made terrible choices, but you're making better ones now. That gives me hope that when you're released, we'll be able to build something real together, something based on who we really are, instead of who we thought we were supposed to be." I sealed the letter and set it aside to mail tomorrow, then poured myself a glass of wine and looked out at the ocean one more time. The water looked peaceful in the moonlight, no longer the threatening presence it had been for so long after my near drowning. Jessica had whispered, "Say hi to the sharks," as she pushed me toward what she thought was my death. But the sharks had never found me, and I'd survived to tell the story. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.